to Kardec Ready for Teens. I'm Bia, and Kardec Ready for Teens is a place where teens can talk to other teens about Spiritism and learn from the teachings of the Spiritist books. Sometimes it's hard to effectively learn something if we're just listening to adults lecture it and tell you it without any real explanation, without in your own words. So hopefully us talking to each other, us teens talking to teens, will be able to understand it better because it's in our own language. We can talk how we normally talk on a day-to-day basis. Last week, we started to read the Spirits book and go through it, and just while we were reading to understand what was being said. So reading a little bit of it and then going back and understanding what it is. And I'd like to continue that on today. I think it's really important that we do this because I know most of us teens have never picked up any type of Spiritist book, especially this one because it's so big, and we think that, oh, we don't need to do that, and we think, oh, only the adults do that. But one day soon we're going to be the adults and we need to know it, and it's important that we start studying now since we have the availability to learn it. Last week we started on the preface and the intro, and the intro is pretty long, and I know when we usually pick up a book, we skip right over the intro and we just go straight to the book, straight to the questions. And we don't bother reading what's in the intro, but the intro, it's really important to go over and read because it sets up the fundamentals that we need to know, because if we don't know the fundamentals, how are we going to go in and understand the rest of the book? And that's why they lay out all the information that we should know beforehand in the introduction. So I think it's really important for us to go over it and to understand that part before we dive into any of the questions in this book. And while we're reading the book, every couple of weeks we can change it up and talk about a different topic for a week and then go back to reading the book. But having this constant reading the book is a good way for us to keep learning, even when we're in school and we're learning about a bunch of things. But it's only like 25 minutes to half an hour of this book a week, so I think we can do it if we work at that pace. So let's get right to it. Section 3 of the introduction. To start with, we will briefly recall the progressive series of the phenomenon that originated the doctrine. So right away we can tell that whatever's going to be said right here is going to be important because it says it originated the doctrine. So if something originated, if it started what we believe in, then it must be really important, right? So continuing. The first event to be observed was the movement of various objects, popularly called turning tables or the dance of the tables. This phenomena appears to have been the first observed in America, or rather it reoccurred in that country, since history shows that it actually dates back to remote antiquity, and was produced and accompanied by the strange occurrence such as unusual noises and raps, emitted without any obvious or known cause. From America it rapidly spread throughout Europe and other parts of the world. It was met with much disbelief at first, but the multiplicity of the experiences soon left no doubt as to its reality. So that part right there, it's really interesting to see because it's saying how it first started in America and then it spread throughout Europe. And it's saying how, of course, everyone didn't believe it at first. Everyone was like, oh, you're kidding, someone's doing that. But then slowly, after more and more people experienced it, they were like, oh, wait, that is right. It is happening. So then more and more people believed in it, and that's how the awareness came to be about. And also, if you're not familiar, the turning tables, what happened was that through mediums, they didn't really know they were mediums at the time, I guess. They would communicate with the spirits, and they would ask a question, and maybe the tables would move, or an object would move, or a knocking would happen, and that's how they would communicate for a while before psychography and before it got more advanced. If the phenomenon had been limited to the movement of physical objects, it might have been explained by some purely physical cause. After all, we are far from knowing about all the secret agents of nature, or even all the properties of those we do not know about. Electricity, for example, offers to humankind a resource that multiplies daily, and it appears ready to illuminate science with a new light. Therefore, if electricity were modified by a certain circumstance, or some unknown agent, it is quite possible that it could have been a cause behind the movement. The gathering of several persons in a group increased the strength of the action, which appears to support this theory, since such a group could be regarded as a kind of multi-cell battery, which power corresponds to the number of participants. So this paragraph right here, it's kind of saying, yeah, people did have doubts, and they had right to doubt it, because how are we just going to believe that, oh, okay, a table turned, and that's it? And that's what it's saying, that if it was limited to just the physical objects, we wouldn't have gotten as far, because it's hard to prove that that's anything. And so it continues. The circular movement of the objects was nothing extraordinary. It belonged to nature itself. All the heavenly bodies moved in circles. Thus, we could have had before us nothing more than a small reflection of the general movement of the universe, or rather, under certain circumstances, an as yet known cause to the fortitude producing in small objects a current analogy to which impels the world through space. So here again, people are giving another excuse or another reason why they're like, oh, well, maybe that's not spirits, maybe it's just the world turning or the universe, and they could believe that the universe was turning, but not that spirits. And so it continues. The movement, however, was not always circular. It was frequently brusque and disorderly. The object would be violently shaken, overturned, carried about in every direction, and contrary to all the laws of statistics, suspended and held in the air. Nevertheless, there was nothing in these events that might not be explainable by the force of some invisible physical agent. After all, do we not see electricity knocking down buildings, uproot trees, attract or repel the heaviest bodies, or hurl them to a considerable distance? Assuming that the unusual noises and raps were not common effects of the wood expanding or some other fortuitous cause, then they might have very well been the product of an accumulation of some kind of concealed fluid. After all, does electricity produce the most violent noises? And they're continuing on again and again with the thoughts of the people of the time, saying, how could that be true? Why would noises just mean it's a spirit? There's so many other causes that could be. Electricity, the wood, the wind. It can be so many things, so how can we just assume? And that's the concern of the people at the time, and people being introduced to Spiritism, because they don't know what it is, and they don't exactly believe it yet. And that's why these phenomena are really important, because people didn't believe it. They had no idea what it was, so there needed to be this phenomena to catch their attention, to grab their attention, and for them to question it and research and look more into it and find out more information and make it into Spiritism that it is now. Because without those phenomena, the attention wouldn't be grabbed. People who were mediums, who saw spirits, who communicated with spirits, were seen as crazy, and they went into asylums, and they went to prisons, and they were treated very, very poorly, because people just thought they were crazy. But now, with these phenomena, and that a lot of people can witness, it grabs the people's attention more, and they research it more, instead of just someone thinking you're crazy. Up to this point, everything might have been considered as belonging to the domain of purely physical and psychological. Even within this narrow scope, however, one would think that the material at hand would surely be worthy of serious study and attention of scholars. Why was that not the case? As hard as it is to admit, it is connected to reasons that prove, among thousands of similar ones, the shallowness of humankind. First, the commonness of the main objects that served as the basis for the earliest experiments. A plain table was nothing out of the ordinary. How interesting is the influence of a simple word in the most serious matters. Without even considering the fact that the movement could include an object whatsoever, the focus on the tables undoubtedly prevailed at the most convenient, because they could accommodate more individuals around them than any other piece of furniture. However, superior minds were sometimes too narrow-minded, and felt it too belittling to concern themselves with what was called the dancing of the tables. The phenomena observed by Gallivan had likewise been observed by ordinary persons. Instead, and given some burlesque name, it would probably also have been regarded as the same credibility as a magic wand. What scholars would not have deemed it beneath them to concern themselves with the dancing of the frogs. So now it's showing a really interesting part, because it's showing how not only did some people not believe it, even some really superior minds, if they were curious and they kind of were like, oh, that's kind of interesting, maybe that shouldn't happen, maybe we should look into it, they kind of held back from that. They didn't, because they didn't want to be that person. They didn't want to seem crazy researching that. They didn't want that attached to their name. So they kind of backed away from it, and they stepped down, and they were like, oh, I don't really want to get involved with that. I don't want to research into that. So they kind of stepped away because they were like, oh, that's crazy, it doesn't make sense, and they just gave up when they could have had the potential to really discover and learn a lot more about it. A few individuals, however, were modest enough to admit that nature might not have given them its final word, and they wanted to observe the matter for themselves in order to set their minds at ease. But it just so happened that the phenomenon did not always correspond to their expectations, and since it was not produced consistently, either according to their wishes or their methods of experimentation, they came to a negative conclusion. However, despite the verdict, the tables continued to turn, and we may state with Galileo, nevertheless they move. Furthermore, we can state that the occurrences have multiplied in such a way that nowadays they have earned the right of citizenship, and that we only need to find a rational explanation for them. Can anything be inferred against the reality of the phenomenon by the fact that it is not always produced in exactly the same way and according to the will and requirements of the observer? The phenomena of electricity and chemistry depends on a certain condition, but could we deny their existence because we cannot be produced apart from such conditions? Should we find it surprising that the phenomena of the movement of objects by the human fluids also requires its own special conditions, and that it ceases when the observers, set in their point of view, try to produce it at their own whim, or subject it to the law of ordinary phenomena, without considering the fact that for a new order of events there also must be new laws? In order to understand such laws, it is necessary to study the circumstances under which the phenomena are produced, and such a study cannot be but the results of preserving, carefully, and sometimes very prolonged observations. So again, they're kind of saying the same thing, which is really showing how important it is and how influential it was in the people of the time, because so many people, they were curious, but at the same time they were like, oh no, it can't be that, it can't be that, we can't believe it's that, there's so many other reasons. But on the other hand, they're like, wait, but doesn't this happen in electricity? Doesn't this happen in chemistry? Why can't it also be happening with spirits, with other things? Why can't it be something else? So there was both ways, but everyone had a question about it. No one was sure what it was. People often object that there is frequently obvious fraud involved. We, in turn, would like to ask if they are quite sure that it is fraud, or instead, if it might be that they have attached a fraud label to things they were unable to understand, the same way an uneducated person might see in a physician's experiments only the trick of a deft magician. And even assuming that fraud doesn't sometimes occur, would that be a reason to deny the phenomenon itself? Must we deny physics simply because there are magicians who call themselves physicians? Moreover, it is necessary to consider the character of supposedly fraudulent persons, and what interest they might have in deceiving us. Could it all just be a prank? A prank can hold our attention for a little while, but if it goes on for too long, it becomes wearisome for the prankster as for the object of the prank. Furthermore, a prank perpetuated from one end of the world to the other, and amongst the most serious, venerable, and enlightened individuals, would be something at least as extraordinary as the phenomena itself. So once again, that's another question that people were asking at the time. Couldn't this all just be a fraud? Couldn't there be someone controlling it? Maybe everyone, all these experiences, it's just someone or something behind all of this. It could just be a prank, a fraud, and it's not real at all. And everyone at the time was having these questions, and no one really knew what to think at the time. And now it goes on to section 4 of the introduction. It was soon discovered that the impulses given to the objects were not simply the product of some blind mechanical force. Rather, an intellectual cause was behind in the movement. This opened the way to an entirely new field of observation. The veil could be lifted on so many mysteries. Was there actually an intellectual power involved, however? If so, what was it? What was its nature? What was its origin? Was it superior to humankind's? Such were the other questions that derived from the first. So now they realized that no, it can't just be these tables are moving. It's not just science. There's something intellectual behind this. And so now they started again with questions on, could this really be intellectual? What do you think it is? What are they superior? And then it continues. The first intelligent manifestation occurred by means of tables that moved and struck the floor with one leg a certain number of times, thereby responding to the questions asked, according to what had been agreed on as to the number which would indicate either yes or no. Yet here there was nothing very convincing for the skeptics, since it could have easily been seen as a chance effect. Later, however, more highly developed responses were receiving using the letters of the alphabet. By striking the floor a certain number of times for each letter, the table formed words and sentences in response to the questions. The correctness of the responses and their congruency with the question caused astonishment. When asked about its nature, the mysterious being who gave the response declared that it was a spirit. It stated its name and furnished other sorts of information. This should be seen as a highly important occurrence. No one individual in particular has ever even thought of spirits as a way to explain the phenomena. Instead, it was the phenomena itself that revealed the term. Hypotheses are frequently formed in physical science to serve as a basis for reasoning, but that did not happen in this case. So this paragraph is really interesting because now we're changing the way we're looking at it. We're not just thinking, okay, it's nature, it's electricity. We realize that, okay, it's something more. And so they start asking questions, saying, okay, knock twice for yes, one for no. And they start asking like that. But again, skeptics were still like, oh no, that can't be right. You know, it still could just be by chance. It's just happening like that. So people were still skeptical about it even after that. So they started to go more advanced. Instead of just yes or no, they started using letters, taps for letters, and they were spelling out words in whole sentences. So it was getting more and more complex. Until once they asked what it was, what is this thing that's communicating with us? And it said spirit. So it wasn't that someone came up with that. It was actually the spirits themselves who initiated the idea and gave the idea to the people to put that into one of their lists of potentials. What could this phenomena be caused by? Communication in this manner, however, was wearisome and inconvenient. One of these invisible beings, and this is also a noteworthy occurrence, suggested another. This particular spirit advised fitting a pencil into a small basket or other object. When placed on a sheet of paper, the basket was moved by the same hidden power that had turned the tables. However, instead of a simple, regular movement, the pencil wrote by itself, forming words, sentences, and entire discourses of many pages dealing with the deepest questions of philosophy, morality, metaphysics, psychology, etc., and as quickly as though written by hand. So now, again, they move from just yes and no to the alphabet to now just having a pencil. And it just wrote whatever they didn't really understand what it was, and it was just the pencil was just writing lots of stuff. This suggestion was given in America, France, and several other countries simultaneously. Here are the terms in which was given in Paris on June 10, 1853, to one of the most fervent disciples of the doctrine, who, for many years, since 1949, had been occupied with the evocation of spirits. Go into the next room and get that little basket, attach a pencil to it, and then place it on a sheet of paper with your finger on the rims. This was done, and after a few moments the basket began to move, and the pencil legibly wrote this sentence: "I expressly forbid you to tell anyone what I have just told you. The next time I write, I will write better." Since the object to which the pencil is fitted is merely an instrument, its nature and form do not matter. The most convenient mean was sought for, and is thus made individually began to use a planchetta, which is a small triangle or heart-shaped border. So now we can see that it's escalating more and more. So now they're getting more and more into the studies that it's not just electricity, it's not just the wood, it's not just the wind. There's something more, and they're getting more and more answers. The basket will not move, however, except under the influence of certain persons gifted with a special ability. These are called mediums, that is, intermediaries between the spirits and humans. The conditions that produce this ability are linked both to physical and moral causes that are still imperfectly understood. Mediums are of all ages, of both sexes, and all degrees of intellectual development. Moreover, the faculty can be developed further by exercising it. So now it's getting more intense, it's getting more seclusive. It's not just a phenomenon that we're trying to impress the people, we're trying to get their attention. Now their attention is already got. We already have the attention of the people. So now, instead of just lollygagging and doing silly questions and not really being focused on really learning anything, they were like, okay, so the mediums are going to be the one who are going to be able to receive these messages and talk. They're not going to use any more of the tables or the baskets because there's no reason for it, because there's certain people who can do it, and it's not meant for everyone to be able to do that. So now they're going further and further into the development and the research to find out what it is, what's the cause of it, and they're learning more and more each time. And then it goes on to section 5 of the introduction. It was then realized that the basket and the planchetta were only extension of the hands, and that when mediums held the pencil directly, their hand was made to written by an involuntary, almost feverish impulse. In this way, the communication became faster, easier, and complete. Nowadays, this is the most common method, and the number of persons endowed with this ability is quite considerable and increasing daily. Finally, experiences reveal many other varieties of mediumship, and it is discovered that communications could also occur through speech, hearing, sight, touch, etc., and even through spirits writing directly, that is, without using the medium's hand or the pencil. So now we can see that it's really escalating, that we're learning so much more, and that now the medium can just directly hold the pencil instead of it being in a basket, and they can also talk and see, and there's so many ways that now we can communicate, and it's being so much easier to gain more information. The fact having been established that there's still one more essential point to consider: the role of the medium in the response and the part he or she might play both mechanically and mentally. Two crucial circumstances make it possible to settle the issue. The first is the way by which the basket moves under the medium's influence by simply placing the fingers on its rim. An examination will show the impossibility of the medium's guiding the basket in any way. The impossibility becomes especially obvious when 2 or 3 persons are touching the basket at the same time. It would require a true phenomenally coordination of movement between them, in addition to an extraordinary similarity of thought that would enable them to understand each other and give answers to the questions. Another, no less, original fact adds to the problem, that being the radical change in the writing according to the individual spirit who communicates, the same writing recurs whenever the same spirit returns. For this to happen, it would become necessary for the medium to have trained him or herself to change writing styles 20 different times, and furthermore, he or she would have to remember the styles of this or that spirit every time. So here they're kind of busting a myth. They're saying, okay, so some people think that, oh, well, the medium can just be faking this whole thing. But they're saying, well, no, it can't, because when it's the basket moving, you can see how impossible it would be for 3 people to all decide to move the basket in the same time and to be thinking the same answers. And also, for the writing, each writing is for each spirit. It's in a different handwriting. So it would be impossible for the medium to memorize millions of handwritings for them to write. So how do you remember even 2 handwritings, let alone remembering 20 handwritings each time for a certain spirit? So it would be really difficult. So that's one of the things they're saying. How can you think that? Because how would they possibly remember all these handwritings? The second circumstance results from the nature of the response themselves, which, in most cases, especially when dealing with abstract and scientific questions, are obviously outside the knowledge, and sometimes the intellectual reach of the medium. Moreover, the medium is usually unaware of what is being written, or may not even understand the question, which may be asked mentally or even in a foreign language, with the answer given in the same language. Furthermore, the basket may write spontaneously about some completely unrelated subject without any question having been asked regarding it. So another question that they're saying is that some people are saying, oh, well, it still could be the medium, but they're saying, well, no, because they're written in different languages. Sometimes the medium doesn't even know a question. Sometimes they just start writing. And so it could be in a different language and a different time. They don't even understand what the question's properly asking for them to answer it. So it really isn't the medium. It's really an intellectual being that's really doing it. In some cases, the responses reveal a level of wisdom, depth, and timeless, and the thoughts are so elevated and sublime that they could only have come from a higher intelligence, imbued with the purest morality. At other times, they are so flippant and frivolous and so banal, and that reason to refuse to accept the possibility that they could have come from the same source. Such diversity of language can only be explained by the diversity of the intelligence who manifest themselves. Are these intelligences human or not? That is the point to clarify, and for which a complete explanation, as conveyed by the spirits themselves, will be found in this book. Here we are facing obvious effects that are produced outside the circle of our habitual observations. These effects do not occur mysteriously, but in the full light of day. Anyone can see and observe them because they are not the privilege of one individual in particular. They are repeated every day by thousands of persons at will. These effects necessarily have a cause, and since they reveal the action of an intelligence and a will, they are outside and purely physical realm. Many theories have been formulated regarding the matter. We will examine them briefly when we see if they can render a comprehension of all the facts that have surfaced. In the meantime, however, let us accept the existence of being distinct from humankind, since that is the explanation given by the intelligence themselves, and let us see what they might have to tell us. So once again, they're saying that, no, when we started off, we were all questioning what could it be, but now it really has to be an intellectual being. It really has to be something more. And that's really what the conclusion they came to, and that it's not just a medium, a special person. Anyone can observe it, and many people do it. So with the answers, we can see that it's different beings, and there's different thoughts. Some are frivolous, some are so superior. So we see the diversity in the answers and in the responses, and that's what we're really going to learn about in the rest of the book. So I think that's a good place to leave off for this week, so we can continue off next week on to section 6 of the introduction. And I hope you all really enjoyed that, because I know I did. I learned so much from reading that and going through it and highlighting. And if you don't have a copy of the book, I suggest you get it, because it's really good to not only just read it yourself in a book, but to also highlight, and you can mark in key parts that you liked better. But of course, I would still like to continue with our daily book of positive quotations. And for today's date, September 13th, the title is Consistency. Consistency is the last refuge of the unimaginative. But we've always done it this way. We complain when someone challenges us to make a change. But sometimes it's good to change, even if it's just for the sake of change. Trying new things help us become more flexible and open-minded. Good traits to have when change is unavoidable. If a particular change doesn't work out well, we'll still have learned something that we can use for the future. I am open to change, and I will make a small change in my everyday routine just to see how it feels. That was a really nice message, and I hope that we can all reflect on that throughout our week, and also reflect on what we read from the Spirits book and see how that. This has been Kardec Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening.